All right, in this video, I just want to capture, for posterity's sake, some of the techniques I used when taking this model here. This is the actual game-ready model that I've been working on for the past month or so. And there's a couple techniques that I just wanted to record, mostly for myself so I don't forget them. But also, I think this would be helpful for some others who may be creating game characters like this. This guy is now, let's see, he's about 44K in terms of points. Here's the wireframe on him. And you know, in ZBrush, he's about 144 million points. And so I wanted to capture a couple techniques that I used when going from that high poly concept to a refined high poly to this, ultimately this low poly mesh that is now ready for texturing. Okay, let's get into it. The first technique I'm going to show is basically going from a high poly sculpt concept and how do you refine that high poly mesh in order to make it ready for projection into low poly bakes. Okay, and so basically what I'm showing here is the state of the model about a month ago. And you'll see here, I've got this little piece. This is basically his kind of his hip area. It's just one piece. If I show the model as it is today, these are multiple pieces. These are no longer Dynamesh pieces. These are actually, retopologized and, high res, I've basically subdivided them, right? And so what I'm going to show you is how do I go from this to this in as quick a way as possible. So the first thing I would do with this piece is I would isolate it and I would break this into 3 different pieces. I believe that's what I did with the main model. And one way of doing that is to use polygroups to your advantage. So I'm just going to slice this. And I'm just going to create those 3 groups by just simply slicing this piece into multiple pieces. And let's see how this is going there. Okay, great. So now that I have 3 different polygroups, what I can then do is select one of them and then just split the hidden. Okay, and so now I'll do the same thing on this one, split hidden. And now I have 3 different pieces. Okay. So for each of those pieces, I'm going to re-Dynamesh. And so now they're full pieces, okay? So now it's a matter of deciding, okay, what's the fastest way to get this thing retopologized? And a lot of folks, and even, you basically can stay inside ZBrush to retopologize or push it to another tool to retopologize. And I actually do both, and it depends on the shape. In this particular case, I'll just do this inside ZBrush and see how I'll show you how the fastest way I do that, which is to make use of the poly paint brush. So the poly paint brush is BP, select poly paint, which is paint. Okay, it's the paint brush. Now what I did is I selected the paint brush and I created basically I saved as that paintbrush to make the poly paintbrush. I called it a poly paintbrush because I wanted to make sure that the Z intensity and the RGB intensity was always at 100 before I started to use it. And so what I generally do is I'll come in, I'll make the draw size for the brush 2, and then I will make the the color black, and then you paint where you want your polygroups. Okay, so in this particular case, I'll come around here, come down, and you don't have to be exact about it, right? So it's actually pretty quick. You really don't have to get precious with it. You do this pretty quick, and it's honestly just wherever you want those polygroup edges. And in this particular case, I think in my main model, I split this off actually, but let's just do this for now. And I'm going to hit V, pull this down here. Let's see what this looks like. Let's just see what this looks like. We'll kind of do that. You can go as detailed as you want, but the key piece here is that these lines have to connect. If they do not, if you have a gap in the line, it won't create the polygroup correctly. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in a second. So let me just do this. I'm doing this just really quick for demo purposes. Okay, that's probably good enough. And then I'll just wrap this around. Do that. Okay. So now if you look at the polyframe here, now if I go into Polygroupit from Paint, and basically this is, you click this guy and see how it created a polygroup for each area. Now let me show you, let me undo that. Let me show you what this looks like if you actually have a gap. So I'll purposely put a gap there and do the polygroup again. Polygroup it. See how that didn't create two polygroups there? Yeah, you got to be careful about that. So just keep that in mind as you're using this stuff. Make sure that's solid. Then do the polygroup it from to finish. Okay. Now, the key piece here is you'll notice how, you know, this is Dynamesh. So it's all kind of jagged, kind of nasty. What you can do is do a polish by groups, and then that smooths out the lines between all the polygroups, okay? And then just fire up ZBrush or ZRemesher. And I always turn the adaptive size down to 0, go half, keep the groups, and do a ZRemesh. Okay, and let's see what this does for us. And you'll end up doing this a couple times. I'm gonna hit V to turn off the black. So now just do it again. Just keep doing it until you get to a spot where you think that's where you want to be. That's probably too much. Okay, so that's what we've got. And now the other key piece here is you want to do a crease by polygroup. So it puts a creased line where any polygroup border is. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure your crease level is down to, say, probably 2 in this case. So that when I subdivide this, I'm going to hit subdivide, the third time it starts to actually round it out. Okay. So you can see it's not perfect because I added more than I needed here, but that's actually, you know, fairly clean. And you can go even more, or I can reduce. Let's say I don't want those divots there. I can just smooth that out. ZRemesh again. Okay. Now I'll crease the polygroups again, but this time I'm going to say crease level I'll put to 1, and you'll notice the difference here when I subdivide again, it starts to smooth it even more, so that gives you a nicer kind of bevel. See what I mean? So that is how I did a lot of these pieces. Now the other technique that I did quite often is I'll go to this guy. Is I would just punch this over to Houdini. I would copy this, Ctrl+Shift+C. I'd copy the tool. I would go over to another subtool over here. I do a Ctrl+Shift+P to paste it in. There it is. I Ctrl+G, which basically does a go Z. Okay. Then I hop over to Houdini, where I've already hit the start go Z. I've already hit this button here. And I do a go Z, and I've created these two go Z imports, which I'll make available on my gumroad if I haven't already done that. And then I say reload. And there's the piece from ZBrush. Now, the great thing about this, because I'm using Houdini Modeler, is I can come in here and hit Alt-W and go to topologize, and now I'm topologizing. So now I can just click, click, right? And then I can start to just pull this, do this. And I can just really quickly get a mesh in place here, you know, without much ado. And I can get this topology to look exactly how I want it. I can decide to, like, maybe I don't topologize this completely. Maybe I maybe I pull this over here and do something like this, and maybe just do that and then connect this. You know, whatever you want to do here, bottom line is you can make this topology look exactly the way that you want it to look. You know, you have complete control, of course, at this point. And this could work with ZBrush or what have you. And so I'll just do this really quick. Maybe do that. Take it up here, maybe. Let me take this, do that, come over here. So, you know, you get to the point where you don't have to be precious with it. You can go pretty quickly. And then what you do is leveraging ZBrush's polygroup capabilities. Let me connect that guy. Oops, let me bring this down here, maybe down, pull this down here. Whoops. I keep screwing that up. Okay. And I don't necessarily care about the back, but let's say I wanted to make use of the polygroups again. Now what I can do in Modeler here is I can select a number of faces. Let's say like this. I can set the color. Whoops, undo that. Set that color, right? Let me be done with topology. There's my piece. I've created that polygroup. And now what I'm going to do is send this back over to ZBrush by doing the export, right? And then just say send to ZBrush, brings it back in. If I isolate this, there's my piece. I've got the polygroups, whoopsies. Got the polygroups in place. And now see here, I can go into here and say crease polygroups. And let's say I want to do this to crease level of 1. And there's my piece. And that may or may not be what you want. In this particular case, it probably isn't. Probably want to take this up to 2. Yeah, let's do that. Right? And then I can undo that and then Ctrl+Shift+C, go back over to your main model, Ctrl+Shift+P, and go right back in, right? And then that piece becomes the beginning of your final for this particular piece, right? So between the ZBrush, Polygroupit, and the ability to completely retopo inside your DCC of choice, and mine, it's Houdini, you can really move quick to retopologize a character like this, okay? The next step in the process is once you've refined your high poly sculpt, you now need to generate the low. And the technique that I've found most effective for me is I basically go, this is my high poly. I've got everything subdivided, etc. But it's 151 million polys, right? Or points. You don't want to export this and try to, you know, and retopo and generate your low from this. It's just too heavy. You'll spend all your time watching ZBrush export your files. What I have determined the best way here is you basically create a duplicate subtool that you decimate. Okay. And so what I ended up doing is I have everything broken up into subtools here. Right. And so what I would grab is I would go to not just subtools, folders that make up those subtools. And then I would take and I would go to one of the folders. Let's say I was going to go and create the low poly for the helmet. The first thing I would do is come over here. Actually, I would go to Z plugin, Subtool Master, and I would copy the folder. So you select the helmet, go to Z plugin and say copy the folder. Then I go over to a different subtool, which becomes my decimated subtool, and I would save this as main character DEC. That was my kind of format here for decimated. And I would paste. I'd go to Z plugin, paste folder into this subtool. Okay. And from there, I would then go through each of the subtools in that folder and decimate each of them down to decent sizes. So if you see you know, I don't have anything more than say 20K. If you look at the active points here as I scroll, 20K is, I try to keep it as like the biggest subtool that you'll find. And if you hover over that particular folder, you know, the total points here is like 2.4 million. So when you're all said and done, I basically took my high poly, which was 151 million points, and decimated it down to 12 million. And then I export each of these folders represents an FBX all by itself. Okay. And so then I would take that folder, I would make it the only thing that's visible, and then I would export and create an FBX. I go, this is how I'd say from ZBrush, I create an FBX called Helmet High. Okay. And then I'd go on to the next step. Once you've exported your decimated high poly models, then what I do is I go into Houdini to do my retopology to create the low poly. And the way I do that, and it's the same for each piece, every one of those folders that I was showing you in ZBrush, I export it as a high. So in that last example, I generated that helmet high FBX. If I jump into this geometry, you'll see where I'm pulling in that FBX file. I then unpack it, because this FBX brings it in as a packed geometry. I unpack it. I clean up a bunch of attributes on it. So I remove almost everything except the name. And I could actually remove the name too. Then I just loop through and rename everything to helmet high underbar with the names under it. So if you look at this, it's just taking those pieces. And this is honestly, you don't even have to do this, but I wanted to keep it fairly clean. And then I export this model after I've kind of done all that work. I export that as helmet high from Houdini. And then I punch that into my helmet low. Okay. In this particular case, I had actually retopologized with the same technique that I showed you in the other video, earlier. And I just broke this into 3 pieces, but then I just merged them, so it doesn't matter. But the key piece that I wanted to show you here is once you've done your retopology, which is what these 3 nodes represent, I didn't care about the UVs to the point where I just used the Labs RizomUV. So I've got RizomUV installed, and this just auto generates the UVs for me. And so literally, if I hit cook here, you'll see RizomUV jump up. Well, it actually didn't, because it is the same UV. I'll show you on another one. And it automatically generates the UVs. Then I slap a material on it. That's important, because we're going to push this over to Marmoset to do bakes, and you get a texture set for every material that you have here. I name it Helmet Low, and then I give it some normals. I soften them, and I export this as Helmet Low. Okay. And I do that on every one of those folders that you saw me have in ZBrush. So here I brought in the neck, did the exact same steps there. I come up here, the neck low. If I come in here, this is where I have that RizomUV. If I cook this, there it goes. RizomUV brings it in, automatically generates the UVs. And then it's cooked. I don't have auto cook on because I don't want to do this every time I come in. But it's the exact same thing. Throw a material on it, name it neck low, throw some normals, soften them, save it out. And then I'm ready to then pull that in to the next step, which is let's go do some baking inside Marmoset Toolbag. Okay, now the last step in terms of going from high to low poly is getting into Marmoset and baking. And all I do for this is I create a bake project. Hopefully you can see my cursor over there. I go to a bake project, and for every one of those folders I had in ZBrush, I will have a folder inside Marmoset. And the way that happens is you go into the load, and I select the high and the low. So in this particular case, the helmet high and the helmet low, for each one of those, and do an auto load. Okay. And from there, I select the maps that I want to generate. So I create normals, the normals, basically the position ID, the position, the curvature, ambient occlusion, the object ID. Now this is important because I want a mask, basically a mask map that I can use when I go to texture. And then I also have an alpha mask that is generated. I did that specifically for this mesh here. That's a generated alpha. So that's a very simple, it looks like a net, but it's not. And that's it. And then you bake. Then you basically hit the start. I have an offline baking model because it got too heavy otherwise. And I start, and it is so fast. It generates so quickly the masks. The maps. And what I'm going to be doing, and I'm not going to show this here because I'm not there yet, but I am going to actually texture inside Marmoset. And so if I go in and I create the texture pack, this is where I'm going to actually go and do texturing inside Marmoset. And, it automatically brings in based on here I've got, let me move this guy down here. So for the helmet, for instance, the hands, the helmet, see how this, this object ID, this becomes super important. See, it creates basically a different color for all the objects. That is hugely, hugely important when you start to texture. And that's basically just every single object in my high poly mesh gets a different color. And Marmoset generates that. Okay. So that's it. That's the whole process, going from the high poly kind of concept mesh, refine that concept mesh into a refined high poly, take the high poly, decimate it, generate out the high poly from those decimated models, then retopologize into your low poly model, and then get it into Marmoset and generate your maps. And then you hopefully will get to something like this as quickly as possible. Okay, I hope that was helpful.